I've spoken a lot about WestConnex, and I was walking across Camperdown Memorial Park on the way here and was thinking, well, we have come a long way. We have really come a long way, and I might start at the most recent bit of the story around how we managed to get this inquiry up, and then go a little bit back, and then we can look at where we're at today. For a good few months in the New South Wales Parliament earlier this year, I was wandering around with a piece of paper. I don't have the piece of paper with me, so just pretend it's this one. I was wandering around with a piece of paper that had a terms of reference, a draft terms of reference for an inquiry for a new New South Wales Upper House committee that had been established called the Public Accountability Committee. My view was, when I heard that this committee had been formed, despite the fact that Fred Nile was the chair of it, was that if there was any issue the newly formed Public Accountability Committee should be looking into, it is the complete disaster that is the WestConnex project. We are talking a project that when it was announced was a $10 billion toll road, that was going to connect Western Sydney to the airport and the port. We found ourselves many years later with a $20 billion plus project that actually allows people living in the west to come and do a U-turn under where we are now and go back to the west, because it doesn't actually go anywhere near the airport or the port. In that process, we saw a complete agenda to privatise the Sydney Motorway Corporation. We saw an absolute lacking and failure in terms of the planning process, in terms of the transparency around the business case, and really questionable details in terms of the modelling, the impacts on local traffic, the impacts on air quality, the impacts on so many things. And in that process, we saw really disastrous situations with the loss of people's homes and the acquisition of land, and I'm sure other speakers will touch on that. I got to the point earlier this year, and we got to the point where basically the call for an inquiry into this disastrous project had been going on for way too long. It was my Greens colleague, and I'm pleased to say now the Greens Senator for New South Wales, Maureen Faruqi, that actually back in May 2014 stood in the New South Wales Parliament and said that there needed to be an inquiry into WestConnex. I know that many of you and many others that live in our community and across the route signed calls for petitions and actions to call for an inquiry to happen. But what I knew was going on is that we were getting bombarded by stories of people saying, this is happening to me on my street, this is going on, they're not complying here, I can't get an answer there, they're treating me like crap here, they're not doing this here, they're not doing this here. And I was like, we need something that helps us pull this together that is beyond what we are doing in the community action. As a community, we have raised the disaster that is this project, and we have turned around public opinion from something where people used to go and announce amazing things with their hard hats on and their shovels to do a media press conference, and instead now they just drop something on a Friday afternoon because they don't want anybody to scrutinise them over the decisions that are made. So we have done such a good job as a community campaign to expose the disaster that is this project, but we needed something more. And so for about 2 months, I wandered around with my little parliamentary folder and my draft terms of reference and spoke to everyone I could. I spoke to my Greens colleagues in the upper house and said, whenever you're talking to anyone about what could happen, I want you to be able to do this. And I spoke to Labor, and I spoke to key people in Labor, and I said, you guys, you're in a disaster situation with this toll road. On one hand, you're telling people locally you oppose it. On the other hand, you're actually saying that you support it in the Daily Telegraph when you're chatting to them. What are you doing here? Actually, if you had an inquiry, you'd see how much of a disaster it is, and then you'd have an easy way out to say this is why we want to halt and solve this project. After much discussion behind closed doors, waving around this thing, we managed to secure that inquiry, and it is a wonderful thing that we have it. But now the challenge is this, making that inquiry work for us. And that's where I'd like to take you to next. We have done what is a very simple form that you can fill out if you want to make a submission and add your details and comments. You can put attachments to that. You can also see on that form that there's a link to the website where you can put in your own submissions. I know many of the groups in this area and that have campaigned against WestConnex have big plans for the submissions that you make, but I would urge you to take the time to put in your submissions and make your voice heard and make sure that that inquiry hears your concerns about this project. Why is that important? Well, having sat on parliamentary committees, I can tell you why it's important. It's important because there are committee staff whose job it is to go through all of those submissions and consolidate down the views into a draft report that then the MPs will look at and will shape their opinion. While it might be that there won't be 1 or 2 MPs on that committee that will read every single submission that is there, the reality is that there will be committee staff that will go through that, and they will create, from the submissions that you all make, a report with draft recommendations that will be considered by that committee. It is crucial that in that report we go back right to the beginning, right to when we were looking for the business case that was never released in full, right to the questions around who made the decisions around where the money was coming from, and the federal money that was announced as part of Anthony Albanese when he was the Labor Infrastructure Minister to go back into New South Wales, and how those decisions were made. We need to go back to the idea of saying, how were the decisions made about the home acquisitions? How on earth do you engage in a planning process that actually says, this is our plan, this is the route, but the designs are indicative only, and at some point in the future we can change them if we want to? How on earth do you say, well, we're going to give you a detailed modelling on the impacts of local traffic, and then remove an entire entry and exit point in Camperdown, but not revise the plans and reassess what's going on? It is a complete disaster of this project, and we need to tell this story from the beginning. We need to tell it systematically, and we need to tell the impact that it has had on your lives and other people's lives to make it happen. I want to end with this. I don't think that we solve this project in that parliamentary inquiry. I don't think we stop it there. Just like I don't think we ever stopped it from the 10,000 strong petition we tabled in Parliament to get that debate weeks after I was elected to the New South Wales Parliament. I don't believe that any of our individual direct actions were ever going to stop it. I don't believe that our attendance at endless spin doctor public meetings held by the Sydney Motorway Corporation were going to stop it, or individual complaints or recordings of the devastation and destruction were going to stop it. When Scott Ludlam came to talk to people about the impact of WestConnex, the Green Senator for WA, someone asked him and said, well, you managed to stop your thing in Perth and they managed to stop it in Melbourne. And they said, what are we doing wrong here? And he said, New South Wales does corruption like no other state. We know that this project is not in the interests of our community. And we also know that there's not one action or one person that can stop this disaster of a toll road. But what we do know is that we are giving it a bloody good shot in trying. And we owe it to the beautiful communities that we love. We owe it to the protection of our environment, to our city, to the planet, to future generations, to the people out west that will be slugged with tolls, to put in every effort that we can to try and halt this disastrous project. And if we don't succeed, we don't succeed. But there was no way we would have ever succeeded in halting this thing if we had done nothing, and we certainly have not done nothing. We have done so much. It continues on from here. It is a long slog, and I think that this inquiry will give us the next boost that we need to continue the campaign on, to continue the pressure up in the lead up to the election and see what we can do to be able to stop this disaster. Thank you very much.